In today's video, we're gonna talk about math, but not only math, but how exactly we use math in interior design. Do we even need to be good at math to become interior designers? Yes, but not really. I know this may be confusing you, but if you want to learn more about how we use math for interior design, keep watching and let's get right into it. When I was in high school, I hated math. I was pretty good at it, probably because I had the best math teacher anyone could ever have, but I still wasn't very excited about the subject. And it always had me thinking whether I would use it someday in the real life or even in my career. And to my surprise, guys, I have used math in my career. But the way that I use math in interior design is not even half of what I learned back in the day. So let me explain. So as you may already know, mathematics has different branches such as arithmetic, algebra, and geometry. Although we do not use constants or variables or any of those fancy formulas that you may remember from high school, we do work with arithmetic and geometry quite often. And being arithmetic the most basic branch of mathematics, I would say that the math that we use in interior design is pretty basic. And this may be some really good news for a lot of you. One of the most important parts of our job is the task of measuring spaces. And it's not complicated when you are working with a small footprint, but when you're working with a larger footprint is when things can start to get a little bit complex. For example, office planning guidelines might get a bit complicated if you have a huge floor plate that you're working with and you have to design spaces for different departments within that project or within that office. For this type of project, you would need to calculate how much square footage each department needs. And your client may give you information such as how many people are going to be working in each department, what are the sizes of their workstations, do they even need private offices, maybe they do not, and how much storage they need. So this is some of the information that you would need to have in order to calculate the square footage for every department within an office project. So square footage calculation may look a little bit like this. And as you see, it's not really complicated. It's just adding, subtracting, multiplying, and probably dividing. So I would say this is nothing that you couldn't learn how to do fairly quickly. A good resource to check out if you want to learn more about area calculations is BOMA, the Building Owners and Managers Association International, or something like that. You will find a lot of useful information, especially for commercial projects. When you are designing commercial projects, you may be required to provide the gross, the rentable, and the usable area for a given space. So for example, the gross area is measured to the inside of the glass if you are working on a building. Rentable area is calculated by subtracting the vertical penetrations of the building, which would be the shaft, the elevator, the staircases, probably even the ducts. And so you subtract the gross area minus that, and that gives you the rentable area. And the usable area would be the common spaces of the building. So for example, the public washrooms, or probably the elevator lobby and all of those common areas within the building. So the square footage of some or probably of all of these areas may be required by the city when you are working on a renovation project like this. So yes, you do have to know these formulas and like how to calculate all this square footage, but I wouldn't say that the math required to do so is complicated at all. Another instance where you may need to do a little bit of math is when you're working on a new build. For this type of projects, residential projects, you have to know how much you can build within the lot, and that is called the floor space ratio. So for example, if you have a lot of 400 square meters and you have a floor space ratio of 0.3, it means that out of those 400 square meters, you can build within 30% of that total number. And this number is always different depending on the city that you live, on the country, and even it changes from neighborhood to neighborhood. So knowing this type of information is really useful. And then you may need to do some basic math to figure out how much you can actually build When you're working on this type of projects, you also have to respect the guidelines that relate to setbacks of the property. So if you are building a house, there would be a setback number that also changes for every neighborhood, and you cannot build further from that distance. You cannot have a house literally 1 feet apart from your neighboring house. And that is really most of the times to prevent a fire hazard. If your neighbor house starts on fire and your house is literally like 1 feet apart, your house is gonna be on fire too. So, all of this information, it's very much interior design related. You do need to know the knowledge about interior design, and you may need to do some math. But again, guys, it's really not complicated. So for this type of applications, basically area, perimeter, and distances is what you would need to successfully complete a project of this type. One of my favorite parts of interior design is material sourcing. It is so much fun to choose tile, wallpaper, fabrics, upholstery, furniture. It's just so exciting because this is really when the project starts to come alive. But when it comes to material sourcing, we also have to do math. I'm really sorry. We have to calculate how much of what we need to purchase to be able to put on our project. A simple example would be the tile. If you're working with tile that is 24 by 24 a piece, and I'm always talking in imperial units, I'm so sorry, but it's really the units that I'm most familiar with. But anyway, just for the example, if you're having a tile that is X size by X size and you have a space of 400 square feet, how many pieces of that tile do you really need? So this sort of calculations are very common for us to do all the time, even for wallpaper, for upholstery, for drapery. I would say that the hardest thing to measure and to calculate would be drapery and upholstery. Probably the hardest math that I have ever done as an interior designer is the one that you need to comply with local building codes and bylaws and regulations. If you don't know what this is, it's basically a set of rules that all architects and builders and designers have to comply with when working with houses and buildings, whether that includes the exterior or the interior. The whole purpose of building codes within cities is occupant safety and fire prevention. And here in Canada, codes are pretty strict when they pertain to commercial projects specifically. And here is where math will be necessary. Using a restaurant as an example, if you are designing a restaurant, according to the law, there is a maximum occupant load. In other words, a maximum number of occupants that are allowed to be within that restaurant. The person who calculates this number is typically an interior designer or an architect, or both if you're working together on the same project. And there is a formula for calculating the occupant load, and that is the net floor area of the project divided by a factor. Now, this factor is always going to change depending on the type of commercial space that you are doing. It's going to be different from a restaurant to a beauty salon, and it's also going to change within cities. So just using a random number for this example, I just want to show you how that would work. So for example, let's say that the net floor area of your restaurant project is 300 square meters, and you have a factor of 1.2 persons per square meter. You get a total of 250. So that means that the maximum occupant load for that space is 250 people. This is just an example, but there's other few things where you would need to do this type of calculations when you are doing especially commercial projects. Although math is part of our job, sometimes it should not be an obstacle if you want to pursue a career in interior design. Because first of all, you already saw that the math that we typically use is very basic, and we actually cheat all the time. We use calculators to do all of these calculations. And second of all, most of the times you're going to be working with a team where you can actually double check all this information. So guys, these are really most of the instances where interior designers need to apply some math. And as a conclusion, I would say that it's more important for you to have the knowledge that is related to interior design, because that is important, and you do need to know those formulas and how to use the math. But really, the math is not complicated, and I believe that it shouldn't stop you from studying this career if that's what you really want. Guys, I hope that you liked this video. I hope that you found it useful and you learned something today. If you did, please give this video a like, subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you guys next week. Bye!